A Boeing 787 sat parked at Gate C-17 of Houston International Airport. It was just past 7 in the morning, and a light mist still clung to the windows. Inside the cabin, warm amber LED lights glowed along the ceiling of the business class section, reflecting softly on pale leather surfaces and gleaming steel-framed windows. A bilingual announcement played as passengers boarded through the priority lane. Some held cups of hot coffee. Others hurriedly opened laptops to check last-minute emails. Naomi Blake boarded among them. She wasn't loud. She wasn't in a rush. She wore an ivory silk blouse under a light gray blazer. Her naturally curly hair was tied up neatly, revealing a calm face and eyes that were sharp yet kind. In her left hand, she carried a slim, cafe-colored leather bag. No logo, no embellishment. Just a proper bag, containing a laptop, a few folders, and a black leather-bound notebook. She stopped at seat 2A, window side, business class. The light, stone-colored leather seat was slightly reclined, the tray table folded neatly into the armrest. Naomi sat down gently. She didn't inspect the seat features. She didn't take a photo for social media. She opened her laptop, put on her headphones, and began reviewing materials for the executive board meeting scheduled for the next day in New York. The low hum of the air system filled the cabin. The scent of new leather mingled with diluted coffee and a hint of perfume from the passenger behind her. It was a typical busy Monday morning, yet peaceful. Naomi focused on the spreadsheet. A presentation file opened with vibrant charts, the header clear and bold. European Market Expansion Strategy, Q4, 2025. She was completely immersed in her work, until she felt someone's gaze brush past her. A flight attendant, tall, white, blonde ponytail, bold red lipstick, a subtle vanilla-scented perfume, was walking down the aisle with a stern expression, checking passengers row by row. As she passed Naomi, her step faltered, just half a second. She didn't stop. She didn't speak, but her eyes lingered on Naomi's face, and in that fleeting moment, the air shifted. Naomi didn't look up, but she felt it. She knew that gaze too well. She had seen that look in corporate elevators, in boardrooms, even at charity galas. The kind that judged not what you did, but who you were. She tried to refocus on the spreadsheet, but her ears picked up the hushed voices more clearly than ever. Is she in the right seat? Probably. Let me double-check. Naomi looked toward the front of the cabin. She saw the same flight attendant, Chelsea, according to her name tag, speaking with a colleague, pointing in Naomi's direction. They paused at the control panel. Chelsea frowned, her forehead creasing. Naomi exhaled softly. Not heavily, not annoyed, just a quiet, steady breath. She closed her laptop, took off her headphones, and adjusted her blazer. A few minutes later, Chelsea approached. A polite smile on her lips, but her eyes did not smile. Excuse me, ma'am. May I check your boarding pass, please? Naomi nodded gently, with poise. Of course. She took out her pass and handed it over with both hands, a habit she'd kept since studying in Tokyo. Chelsea took it, inspected it carefully, then looked at Naomi. You're in 2A? Yes. Business class? Booked last week. Confirmed by email. Chelsea gave the slightest nod, reluctant. She returned the boarding pass without a, thank you, without a, you're all set. Just turned and walked away without a backward glance. Naomi remained seated, silent. But her eyes had changed, not angry, but no longer neutral. She opened her notebook, pulled out a pen, and wrote a single, quiet line. The 24th of October. AX118. Seat 2A. There are seats not everyone wants you to sit in. Naomi remained still. She had just finished writing the short note in her leather-bound notebook. Her hand, still holding the pen, rested at the edge of the folded table, eyes gazing out the window, where the aircraft's wing was beginning to seal slowly, and the low hum of the engine on the right side had started to rumble quietly. Business class was settling. Most passengers were seated. An older white man entered, carrying a Rimowa suitcase, and took his seat at 3C. His eyes passed briefly over Naomi, then turned away. He said nothing. Naomi paid it no mind. She remained composed, in seat 2A, hands resting on her lap, breathing evenly. But then, the familiar footsteps returned. Chelsea was back, still with that thin smile. But this time, she didn't bother with a polite opener. There was no pretense of courtesy anymore. "Miss Blake, I've just double-checked the system." Her voice was flat, but paused precisely at the places that made it irritating. "There may have been a booking error. Your ticket appears not to match our business class registry. I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to return to your proper seat in the back." Naomi looked up, her eyes meeting Chelsea's. No surprise, no shock, only confirmation of what she had already expected. She nodded. "I see. Can you tell me exactly what in the system indicates that?" Chelsea hesitated for a fraction of a second, then continued with her rehearsed tone. "Unfortunately, I'm not authorized to show you the technical data, but under our internal policy, I have the right to request a passenger temporarily vacate their seat in case of discrepancy." Naomi stared at her, a gaze so steady it turned cold. "And if I refuse?" Chelsea pressed her lips together. "Then I'm afraid it would delay the flight, and I'd have to report to the captain." She closed the notebook, slipped it into her leather bag, shut her laptop, then stood up. Every movement was just enough, not dramatic, but there was something about the way she moved that made the entire cabin pause. A passenger in seat 1B, a blonde woman in her 50s, looked up at Naomi, then looked at Chelsea. But she said nothing. Naomi hadn't expected anyone to speak. She picked up her bag, turned, and walked down the aisle, between rows of seats now starting to murmur. The soft creak of leather, the click of latches snapping shut, the whispered, "What's going on?" It all played like background music for a moment no one wanted to acknowledge. She didn't walk fast, but she walked straight, no slouching, no lowered head. At row 23, Chelsea pointed to the window seat. "You can sit here for now while we clarify the information." Naomi sat down. She fastened her seatbelt and pulled out her headphones, but didn't play any music. She just sat there, no protest, no pulling out her phone to record, no complaining to other passengers. She simply sat. In the tighter space of the economy cabin, with more ambient noise, more movement, and a few more glances cast her way, curious, uncomfortable, and tinged with pity. In that moment, Naomi reached for her phone. Not to call, not to post. She typed a message, short and direct. "Incident just occurred. Meet me upon landing. Send the footage if available." The message was sent. To whom? No one else knew. But Naomi did. She knew exactly what she had just triggered, and it was something no one on that plane would have expected. Naomi sat there, in seat 23A, by the window on the left. There was no longer a wide leather table for her laptop, no longer a reclining seat for the 3.5-hour journey. Just a regular spot, next to a young man engrossed in his headphones and a middle-aged woman clutching her purse, as if someone might snatch it at any moment. Naomi said nothing. No one around her knew she had just come from the front of the plane. No one knew that minutes ago, she had been seated in the first row, where champagne was served, warm towels offered, and the greetings came with a certain extra polish. She didn't want attention. But she knew attention was already happening, whether she invited it or not. At the front of the cabin, Marco Alvarez leaned against the divider between business and economy. Marco was a veteran flight attendant, Latino, 45. He had flown for over 12 years with every kind of passenger, from billionaires to travelers missing their luggage. He didn't speak much, but his eyes, they noticed everything. He had seen the way Chelsea frowned when she looked at Naomi's boarding pass, saw how she scanned the cabin to gauge passengers' reactions before politely suggesting Naomi return to economy. And now, he was watching Naomi sitting silently, doing nothing, and yet somehow unsettling the entire front cabin. Marco said nothing, but he opened a small electronic control panel and tapped a few buttons. The screen lit up. Record crew misconduct. Submit internal report. Code 1BK confidential. He didn't need permission. He knew this was the moment to document. In seat 2B, Clara Lynn, a young Asian woman, the assistant flight attendant assigned to business class, sat frozen. She had just been transferred from domestic routes to international, and today was her first flight working alongside Chelsea. It was also the first time she had seen a passenger downgraded, without anyone giving a clear reason why. Clara recalled the look in Naomi's eyes when she was asked to leave her seat. There was no protest, no tears, no tight grip on the armrest like in those viral videos online. Just a look, deep and sad. Not sad because she'd been insulted, but sad because this kind of thing was still happening. Clara held a water carafe, poured into a small glass, and made her way down to the economy cabin. She stopped quietly at row 23. "Can I get you anything, ma'am?" Naomi looked up. Her expression hadn't changed. Clara hesitated slightly. She was about to say something more, but Naomi smiled first. "Thank you. I'm all right." That voice made Clara straighten, not because of the words, but because of the calm, unblaming look in Naomi's eyes. Clara gave a small nod, then stepped back. But inside her, something had just cracked open. In the cockpit, Captain Elias Ford received an internal call. It was from the executive board, a priority line. "We've just received a report from a senior shareholder. Passenger Naomi Blake is on your flight. There are signs of discriminatory service. Log the incident and submit a report after landing." The captain didn't ask for details. He knew that name. He had met Naomi twice during strategic planning meetings. He glanced at his watch, then spoke quietly into the radio, requesting lead flight attendant to the cockpit. Chelsea stepped in. The usual smile was still there, but this time it was tight. The captain looked at her through the reflective glass. He didn't smile. He didn't scold. He simply asked, "Why was passenger Naomi Blake asked to leave seat 2A? Chelsea stiffened. I noticed inconsistencies in the booking record. I was just following protocol." The captain gave a slight nod, then spoke slowly. "Do you know who she is?" Chelsea blinked. She didn't respond right away. "She's just a passenger?" The captain looked directly at her. "She's an executive board member of Aeromax, a senior shareholder, the person who signed off on the business class service policy you're currently enforcing." Chelsea froze. Not a single sound in the cockpit. Down below, Naomi was still seated. Just an ordinary person, on an ordinary flight. But in the air around her, everything was shifting. The plane had reached cruising altitude. The seatbelt sign switched off. Some passengers began to stretch, open books, or put on headphones. But in business class, the atmosphere wasn't its usual calm. The captain had just called Chelsea Hart out of the cabin. She walked briskly, the light taps of her heels landing on the carpeted aisle, trying to mask the unease in her stride. At the front of the economy section, Clara stood holding the water carafe, quietly watching it all unfold. Marco looked at her and gave a slight nod. No one said a word. But everyone knew something was beginning to turn. Naomi remained in seat 23A quiet. Her head rested gently against the window. She wasn't sleeping. She wasn't working. She simply let her eyes follow the shape of passing clouds, drifting across the thick pane of glass. A few moments later, footsteps approached again. This time, it was Marco. He stood beside her seat, leaned slightly toward her, and spoke in a low voice. "Miss Blake, on behalf of the crew, I want to sincerely apologize for what just happened. The captain has received word from the executive board. We're deeply sorry for not handling things correctly from the beginning." Naomi turned toward him. Her gaze wasn't sharp. It wasn't wounded. It was the kind of look worn by someone who had grown too used to being misjudged. She gave a small nod. Marco continued. You're welcome to return to seat 2A. Everything's been sorted." Naomi lifted her head slightly, but she didn't rise. She spoke slowly, clearly. "That won't be necessary. I'll stay here for the rest of the flight." Marco hesitated. "Ma'am, we can restart full service." Naomi smiled, for the first time since boarding. It wasn't bitter. It wasn't forced. It was simply understanding. "I sat in that seat, but I was asked to leave because someone didn't believe I belonged there. Now I don't need to go back. I want to sit here, to feel exactly what it's like, to be pushed down to a place where thousands of passengers have been sent and no one ever questioned it." Marco bowed his head. He didn't know what to say. Naomi looked at him, not judging, just said, "Thank you for talking to me like a human being." From a few rows back, Clara quietly pulled out her phone. She didn't record anything, but she opened her notes app, and she typed a single line. "Not everyone pushed to the back is weak. Some choose to sit there, so others can learn how to act right." At the front of the cabin, Chelsea stood pressed against the wall partition. Her hand curled into a subtle fist. Her face had gone pale. She didn't dare look back at Naomi. Didn't dare ask Marco what had just been said. She simply froze, because she realized that Naomi's silence was more powerful than any scolding could ever be. A moment later, Marco returned and gently placed a glass of orange juice on the tray in front of Naomi. She didn't say thank you. She didn't need to. She lifted the glass, took a sip, slow, measured. Each sip, as if she were teaching business class a lesson in dignity, with nothing but her silence. As the plane began its descent, the city of New York appeared below like a folded maze. Buildings rose and fell under the muted light of late morning. Over the speaker, the captain announced the weather at JFK. "Clear skies, 22 degrees Celsius, estimated landing in 17 minutes. Please fasten your seatbelt." In economy, a few passengers began to gather their belongings. Naomi did not. She remained in seat 23A, her shoulder gently resting against the cabin wall. Her hand lay on top of the leather-bound notebook, index finger still marking the page with her earlier note. But her eyes weren't looking at it. She was looking forward, not toward the front of the plane, but through it. Through every glance that had once looked at her as if she didn't belong. In business class, Clara stood still beside the cabin divider. Her hand still held the water carafe, but the water inside had long gone cold. Her eyes were fixed toward the back, where Naomi still sat alone. She remembered how Chelsea had entered the cabin that morning, confident, red lipstick, hair flawless. And she also remembered how Chelsea had exited the cockpit, face pale, lips pressed tight, eyes unable to meet anyone else's. Silent, but deafening. Clara stepped into economy class again, making her way toward Naomi, not to serve. She simply stood there and spoke softly. "I know there's not much I can do, but I'm sorry." Naomi turned to her. There was a gentler look in her eyes now, something softened, something different. She replied, "You don't have to apologize for someone else. What you just did is enough." Clara nodded. A quiet nod, the kind that comes from someone who understands that kindness often begins with something very small. In the cockpit, Captain Elias Ford typed a few lines into the internal reporting system. He wrote, "Flight attendant Chelsea Hart acted outside protocol, compromising brand image. Affected passenger, Naomi Blake, executive board member. Recommend review." He didn't need to write more, because some things carry enough weight without ever being spelled out. When the wheels touched down, Naomi didn't react. She simply took a quiet breath. That silence, that moment, was how she knew that what needed to happen had already begun. The landing felt smoother than usual. But inside the people aboard, something was trembling, like a sheet of glass that had just begun to crack. As passengers stood to retrieve their bags, Naomi remained seated. Clara approached, this time not to ask, just to say softly, "The business class exit is separate. Would you like us to escort you through it?" Naomi shook her head, light as a breeze. "I'll leave with everyone else." She stood, took her bag, and stepped out of the economy row, the way someone walks away from an old prejudice, with no need to argue. She left nothing behind. No note, no confrontation, no headline. But after she walked away, for those who remained, nothing felt quite the same again. 3 days after Flight AX118, on the 32nd floor of Aeromax International's New York headquarters, an unscheduled meeting was called. The conference room was long, the walnut table coated in matte finish. Every seat bore a silver nameplate: CEO, Chief Operating Officer, HR Deputy Director, In-house Counsel. No one spoke loudly. No one joked. There was no hot coffee like usual. At the head of the table, Naomi Blake entered right on time. Not early, not late. She placed her bag on the chair, pulled out a slim folder, and sat down. No one in the room asked, "How was the flight?" They already knew, and everyone was waiting for her to be the first to speak. Naomi didn't look around. She didn't need to. She opened the folder, pulled out a single A4 sheet, and placed it in the center of the table. It contained just one bolded line: "Reevaluate all business class crew communication practices, Q4 2025. She looked up. Her voice was steady, not sharp. "I didn't call this meeting to talk about myself." Everyone looked at her, silent. "I called this meeting because what happened to me wasn't an incident. It was a symptom, a long-standing one, often disguised as what we like to call internal protocol." She paused. Her eyes moved slowly across each face in the room. "That day, I was asked to leave my business class seat not because my ticket was wrong, but because I didn't look like the kind of person the crew believed belonged there." A director from HR shifted slightly in her seat across the table. Naomi saw it, but she didn't stop. "If I weren't a shareholder, if I weren't a familiar face in this building, if I had just been an ordinary passenger, that moment would have never been mentioned again." She placed a second sheet of paper on the table. On it were a copy of the in-flight message she had sent and the captain's report. The printed line read, "Lead flight attendant Chelsea Hart, removed passenger without valid cause. Potential unconscious bias confirmed." She didn't read it aloud. Just let them see. "I'm not calling for anyone to be fired. I'm calling for reformation." The air in the room grew heavier than glass, but everyone was listening. Naomi continued, "We can't control what everyone thinks, but we are responsible for how they act toward others when they're wearing the Aeromax uniform." A voice spoke up from the CEO. "What do you want to change?" Naomi looked at him. Her gaze was neither soft nor stern. "I want to start with a question. When a flight attendant sees a passenger, do they see a ticket, or do they see a human being?" A long pause followed. Then Naomi slid the folder across the table toward the CEO. "I propose creating an independent advisory group to review our crew training program. Not just how to pour a drink, but how to see a person without being led by bias." She stood. "If I, as a shareholder, could be pushed out of my seat, then it's certain that many others without a voice have experienced worse. And if we don't change this now, then maybe we don't deserve to take off again." 1 week after the executive board meeting, Aeromax International issued an urgent internal announcement. The headline was just 3 bolded words, with no explanation. "We are reviewing." Below it was a short list. Temporary suspension of lead flight attendant Chelsea Hart. Launch of a 30-day internal investigation. Full retraining session scheduled for the entire business class crew. Authority to design a new behavioral and cultural reform program, granted to the advisory group led by Naomi Blake. There was no mention of the word discrimination. No use of the word discipline. Only the sign of a system beginning to say, "I see now." Chelsea received her suspension notice by email. At that moment, she was sitting in a cafe near JFK Airport. She read it, then read it again. But this time, the usual pride on her face was gone. Not because she'd been reprimanded, but because for the first time in her career, she was forced to reflect on the way her own eyes had once judged others. Meanwhile, Clara Lynn, the young flight attendant, received an internal invitation. She walked into the training floor conference room with hesitation. But there, already waiting on the table, was a printed form bearing the company's logo and a single line. Clara Lynn, recommended for promotion to cabin class supervisor. Reason: proactive, respectful, and unbiased conduct during the 24th of October incident. She couldn't believe it. One small gesture, one question: "Can I get you anything?" And now, it had opened a whole new path. Marco Alvarez also received a special invitation to join the editorial team for the new project. The Visual Conduct Code, a training initiative designed to help flight attendants identify unconscious bias in real-time scenarios. He simply nodded when asked. No speech, no ceremony. Marco understood, sometimes, being the right person, in the right place, at the right moment, is enough. Naomi hadn't spoken publicly since the board meeting the previous week. She returned to her work, meetings, document reviews, strategic planning. But one small detail had changed in her office. On the bookshelf just behind her chair, there was a new frame. Inside wasn't a certificate or a stock document. It was a boarding pass, Seat 2A, the 24th of October. Beside it, a single line printed in fine serif font read, "Fairness doesn't begin with policy. It begins with how you look at someone when you don't know who they are." Aeromax began rolling out a new program, Flying Fair 2025, a service culture recovery initiative requiring every flight attendant to relearn how to see passengers with respect, free from assumption. Not because they needed better publicity, but because this time they had truly seen what they used to overlook. 1 month after the incident, Naomi Blake returned to JFK Airport, not for a board meeting, not to oversee anything, just a routine business trip like anyone else. She walked through the terminal as she always did, white blouse, gray blazer, a sleek leather bag over her shoulder. Her hair still neatly tied back, her eyes calm as ever. No cameras. No one rushing up to recognize her. And she didn't need that, because this time, she didn't need to be seen to feel her worth. At the check-in counter, a female agent looked up and smiled, a real smile, not the kind required by company policy. "Good morning, Miss Blake. Would you like your usual seat? 2A? Naomi let out a soft laugh, not mocking. Just the kind of laugh that comes from someone who once sat there, was pulled from it, and now no longer cared about the number printed on a seat. She replied, "No need. Today, I just need a regular seat. But I do hope that whoever sits in 2A from now on is treated like someone who truly belongs there." The plane took off. Naomi wasn't in business class. She was seated in the first row of economy, the emergency exit row, with more legroom. She sat beside an older woman of African descent who was quietly flipping through the safety card. Naomi helped her adjust her seatbelt. She didn't say much. After the plane leveled off, a flight attendant passed by, a familiar face. Clara. Clara paused for a second, then smiled. "Miss Blake, flying with us again?" Naomi nodded. "This time, I'm just a regular passenger." "And you look like someone who's been promoted." Clara blushed. "Thank you. But really, you're the one who lifted me up." Naomi didn't reply. She simply rested her hand on the tray table. Nodded. "Sometimes, you don't need to be named to know you've left something behind." The plane glided above the clouds, cutting through open blue sky. Naomi opened her old notebook. The first page was still there, the note from the 24th of October. "There are seats not everyone wants you to sit in." She turned to a new page. For the first time in a month, she wrote again. "There are people who don't need that seat. They just need a world where everyone is seen through the eyes of fairness." The plane flew on. Naomi closed her eyes, not to sleep, but to take a deep breath. Because she knew, maybe she'd never sit in 2A again. But from that day forward, Seat 2A would never again be a place someone could be pushed out of, just for not fitting someone else's idea of who belongs.